Hello, and welcome to another episode of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I'm really lucky to be here with Phil Goulet, Director of Sales at Finalsite. And for those of you who don't know, Finalsite works with schools for marketing, managing communications, enrollment, online presence. Pretty cool company. So, Phil, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Really excited.
So you and I were chatting last week, and the the topic I'm kind of paraphrasing is the customer is not always right, and even in the pre-show I was telling you like this is something I'm really passionate about. Man, probably 15 years ago I did a blog on don't ask your customers what they want because they don't know, and I got a lot of pushback on it, and it's funny, Phil, in writing that blog. I did some research. If you look at Walkman or sticky notes, like well, Walkman's been outdated 10 times since then, but that original idea, Sony customers didn't say, we want this, right? That came from an engineer who was a runner and a music lover. Same thing with sticky notes. It came from a musician who was also an engineer at 3M who wanted his notes in front of him. So yeah, and I kind of feel the same way about B2B enterprise sales. Let's at a high level, tell me your view on this customer doesn't know what they want thing.
I think it's crazy to think, and customers probably hate hearing me say this, but I think the vast majority of them don't know what they want.
Yeah.
They don't know because they don't know what they don't know. So it's this challenge of getting them to realize first and foremost that they don't know, accepting that they don't know. It's almost like a therapy session when you're consulting, getting them to accept that they don't know and then come to their own conclusions around what they need to know
Yeah.
to properly shop and buy.
If you look at current evidence and current research, right, there's 6.7, not sure how that 0.7 buyer gets in there, but 6.7 buyers per buy. It's committee buy. It's getting really complex. And there's also evidence that buyers don't buy well. And my sense of that is they're really bad at diagnostics. And I think that I feel the same way about electricians who come to my house or someone who works on my car. They might be brilliantly fixing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's so many people. What's your sense of that about customers? How do they go about understanding what it is they need, especially with multiple people involved?
Yeah. Everybody comes from their own perspective. So, what they're used to doing. I think experience drives so much of what people think about what they need and what they want to buy and move forward with. But that leaves this massive gap of the things you haven't experienced. I've never been to the Grand Canyon. I don't know what that experience is going to be like. I can't project what I want my canyoning experiences to be like based on a thought of what the Grand Canyon is. So really, it's a matter of just opening the mind to accept that again. It's this acceptance of not understanding. And there's just so few people who like to even accept that because they've experienced things in life and they're like, no, I know what I know, and
Right.
we're going to go with that.
Yeah, and I think I used to teach decision making, and if you know a little bit about heuristics, it's all those shortcuts we use in our brain. Which, as you say that, it makes me realize that they are leaning on. Well, this is what I know, and it's like maybe that's where part of the bad diagnosis comes from. The other thing, I wonder how you feel about this. I've watched even with my own sales teams over the years that. Let's talk about the rep side of this. The rep is then reacting like the customer puts out this what we would call an anchor, right? Yeah, boom, let's talk about this. This is what I need. And then subsequent conversations revolve around that thing. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue because yes, you're likely focusing on the wrong things. It also puts you in a easier bucket to compare against anybody else who's out there because the vast majority of people are going to respond to that initial need.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to differentiate yourself if you're responding the same way everybody else is to answering that particular question when the question's wrong to begin with. So it doesn't solve a purpose for anybody. It doesn't help the customer find out what they truly need, and it doesn't help you sell the right solution. So even if you do make the sale, could blow up in your face down the road because it's not what the customer actually needed.
Yeah. And I read an article that is really good about why you and I as sellers are in a position to do this better than buyers. And the metaphor, analogy, whatever it is perfect for me. The customers are like veterinarians, right? They have a bird walk in one day, and then a snake, right? And then an alligator, and it's like they're buying all these different things all the time, and we are not only neurosurgeons, we're spinal neurosurgeons. We know for what you do at Final Sight, it's like, you know how this thing should be bought. You know how to prescribe solutions. And that, when I read that, I wonder how you react to this, because it made me realize, like, we actually do have a ton of value. We do know a lot more how to source this thing and solve the problems that we solve.
Yeah, I agree. We are the experts. Again, just like, you know, I like the vet analogy. My sister-in-law's a vet, so it's close to home. You just, again, always have these preconceived ideas around certain things. So your alligator, hey, I've got this alligator. I've had this alligator for a really long time,
Yeah.
but you have no idea what the inner workings of that alligator are. Hey, my alligator's off. The attitude's different. It's not as friendly with me today as it normally is. I think I need to change the diet. The vet probably going to go into that conversation very, very differently. Explain to me
Yes.
how your alligator is not quite right. Explain to
Right.
me what is off, what
Yep.
personality traits are off. Really dive to the root of, okay, what's wrong with the gator versus what you think
Yep.
is happening with your gator in relationship to you.
Thank you for running with the vet metaphor. I
I love the
appreciate
fact
it.
that you use the gator as an example too, so it just made it better. So
Well, I do live part time in Florida, so we're known for Florida man and gators. So I have to go there. So let's get into the weeds a little bit, and talk about a scenario where the customer was like saying, "Hey, this is what I need," and you knew sort of differently. How do you navigate making that shift?
yeah, I actually did recently have this. We're in a very competitive space. There is a lot of what you would call product parity between the different partners in the space or different solution sets. So I recently actually had a school come to me with a very robust list of demands. And before we were even allowed to realistically respond or submit, a final site proposal, what we can offer, they basically told us that we had to confirm that we can meet this robust list of requirements prior to submission. Some of them were very, very nuanced requests.
Yeah.
You can kind of understand, like, maybe this is just one person talking about this because it's the one person who uses this feature set.
Right.
So initially we were like, hey, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to decline to respond. Based on this list of requirements, we might not be in a full alignment, but we'd love to have a conversation with you, get to the root of what the requirements are, and help determine whether or not we could still be a fit based on the results you're looking for. So we got that conversation, and it turns out that list of requirements was because they have a whole bunch of people in house who do things a certain way, and they wanted to make sure that way wasn't disrupted. They're already really busy. Disruption was not something they were looking for. They were looking for better customer service and basically maintenance of the status quo. We got into all of that. They were wasting a ton of time. A lot of the features were antiquated, don't even make sense anymore. There's a lot of automation that could take the place of things they thought they needed. And ultimately, they realized that list could have been reduced by 50%. They were going to have better, more efficient outcomes, and just really approach the project completely differently by understanding that new things existed and there were better ways to do things, getting over that initial discomfort of
Right.
change.
Yeah. It's interesting because the more you and I talk about this, the more it occurs to me, even though I'm passionate about this subject, it goes back to diagnostics, right? If everything you just said had little to do actually with the solution set you're bringing out there, but what are we solving for? And so maybe, yeah, it just occurs to me in hearing you talk that that's the root cause of this is bad diagnostics on their end. So what do you see mistakes customers making? What are they missing, or what misunderstandings do they have, kind of in that sense, that drives them to asking for something that doesn't fit?
I think the two biggest things, again, it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. You don't know what you don't know. So just driving this idea of, I've been doing this forever, I already know everything I need, and refusing to accept that somebody else can actually teach me something. And then that's the other big thing. Buyers aren't initially looking to be taught something when they're buying. They're not
Yes.
looking at it like, hey, I'm going into a class here. It's, I'm buying something to solve a problem I have. Um, And really, it should be a class. If you're buying something, you should be learning about that something, and it should really be this conception going into that initial meeting that, hey, I'm here to learn something. Um, and changing that is a pretty big challenge in the sales process of getting them to think like, no, I want to learn something as opposed to just be pitched something. Um, so I think that's a really big conception that we are challenged to change.
Yeah.
But the second it happens, it leads to the best results possible in a sales process.
And I may even tee up another frame. I agree with what you just said. And also, it's in essence, we could even go beyond buying something. They're making a decision, and they're probably poorly making that decision. And you make me think about a really great opportunity for sellers to share the best way to make the decision. Let's forget about what when you're making a choice between final site and somebody else. How do you understand what your needs are, and how do you make that choice? I feel like that's mostly a kind of suboptimal process they have.
Yeah. Um, Most of them follow, like, I don't know how many companies, regardless of schools, I've run into who will look up on the internet how to do a bid process and then will change out a couple of different lines here or there that they think is specific to their project. And they're like, great, we've got a perfect template on how to get a bid to meet our needs. And once again, you're talking about a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Hey, this is great for a very specific purpose, but it doesn't drive to the solutions we're looking for. It doesn't actually showcase in any way, shape, or form what you need to accomplish as an organization. Um, Again, requirements versus outcomes, just very, very different.
And then the complexity. You mentioned this earlier of each human. This is my role. This is what I'm thinking about, right? Which is it makes it even worse. This isn't a kind of a one person buy thing. So managing that, the other thing that comes to mind is back to my decision making roots that. I used to use this. It was a letter from Ben Franklin to a pal of his, and it was about decision making. And Ben Franklin said, I can't tell you what decision to make, but I can advise you on how to make the decision. And where I think customers struggle is further in his letter. He said the problem with making decisions is all the reasons pro and con are not present in the mind at the same time. And I think this is what I'm hearing you say. You've got all these different stakeholders in these schools. And yeah, where does that all come together? So we can have a holistic view of the best outcome.
Yeah. And I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head too. You have all of these different stakeholders, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, all of those different stakeholders aren't really that involved in the process. They're not getting all of their input into what needs to happen. So you do get this siloed view of things, though the two or three key decision makers around this are siloing a lot of the responses they got back. They're, not open to all of the feedback they've uncovered because that takes time. That takes their own level of discovery. That takes them getting into this coaching process of what don't you know? And that's just a lot of work from everybody's perspective. So getting that thought process to even change and recognize that the person in charge of the buying decision might not even know what's best for their organization in terms of the pains they're experiencing because have they asked everybody on their team? Have they dove in internally and figured out, hey, is my perspective actually what's best for the greater good? Or am I just thinking about my user experience with something like this?
I feel like there's a certain level of trust because we're changing the conversation, right? There's a conversation they want to have. And what you're suggesting is we have to change that conversation. We have to build trust or credibility. How does your team go about doing that? Because we could really piss someone off by saying, wait, I'm going to interrupt your whole thinking about this. So I feel like that's a key to changing that conversation.
Disarming transparency and honesty is a really big factor. And then also just setting yourself up as an advisor from the beginning. So doing your necessary prep work, understanding the business, the school, the organization you're going to be speaking to, understanding what their strengths already are, understanding where they might have some weakness gaps, and coming to the conversation armed with that knowledge already. And then just having an open dialogue about it. You don't have to talk about your solution set. You don't have to talk about necessarily what you do so well at the beginning. Talk about them, talk about what they're openly trying to do as an organization, and get to the root of what their bigger set of goals are, regardless of how it relates to you and your organization. That way you can again establish yourself as somebody who cares about them, who has their interest in mind, and is invested in their success more so than getting my point across and what I want to show you from a solution standpoint. There is absolutely a time for those, case studies and testimonials. They definitely help build upon that, but start with the organic conversation, get them talking, get them interested in talking to you. And then when you start to realize the questions come back, it's like, okay, we're here.
Yeah. Yes. It's funny too, because I talk to one of my partners about this all the time, about allowing the other side to lean in. And that's what I was just hearing you say. Like, as soon as we start pitching, I feel like there's even a physical, you could see it on Zoom,
Yep.
right? There's that physical
Absolutely.
lean back where you're right. When someone, for me, the moment someone says, wow, that's a great question, they typically physically lean in as well and start providing you with more data. So yeah, that's a cool transition, I think.
It's huge, paramount, I think, in really establishing that
Yes.
credibility.
Yeah, and how formal is your process? So the first part is like changing the conversation. So I guess it's a two-part question. One is like, is it organic? Is it up to each person's style to change that conversation, or do you have a kind of prescribed way of doing that? And then secondly, the process of uncovering those needs to help them diagnose better. How formal or informal are both of those stages?
That's a fantastic question, Brian. So I
Lean
do
in.
think it is adapted. Yeah, I do think you do adapt it based on every salesperson's ability, right? So if
Yeah.
your strength is not diving into questions, and obviously everybody can learn to be an active listener as much as they think they can't. Everybody can learn active listening techniques and how to build their questioning based off of that. But if you can't, if that's one of your challenges, follow process. Stick a little bit more to traditional sales process. Come armed with some questions you are more likely to get to the root of the problems they're facing and the pains they have. But ultimately, the goal should be to make this more organic, to make it feel more like a traditional, real conversation. Again, where you're trying to learn about them as much as possible so that you can showcase your value when that time comes, not right in the middle of this conversation, but when the time comes, you can address those needs from a much higher level understanding, to where they also see that and recognize it. It's not just a yes or no answer to a question. It's a solution.
Yeah.
It truly is a solution.
Yeah, it's what's emerged as a theme across multiple podcasts, and you didn't say it, but you and I are talking about it. It's the slow down to hurry up has been the theme, and I could see with a lot of us as sellers, there is a rush to pitch, right? There's a rush to demo. There's a rush to pitch, and this does. I mean, do you feel that human element with your team that they and the funny thing people miss about slow down to hurry up is the hurry up part. They only hear the slow down. Like, you're going to close faster. But
Right.
what do you feel that kind of human pushback from the team?
Yes, 100%. You have this fear of like, hey, I only have these decision makers available so often or so frequently. I need to put the shining light in front of them as soon as humanly possible so they can, see something shiny dangling and remember that and latch onto it. But ultimately, we have to accept the fact that when we go through that discovery process, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much it eats into the rest of our steps in our cycle and our process, it's still accomplishing what we need, which is establishing that trust, which is establishing that credibility. And at the end of the day, no decision maker is going to walk away from somebody they trust because the process took a little bit longer than what you thought it needed to be. And you didn't throw a solution set or a product in front of them fast enough. I'm not saying dead ear everything a client asks for and don't ever show them anything.
Yeah,
But, yeah, just
it's
take it steady. And
It's as I mentioned last week when we were talking, I love this subject because I think we are in sales to a degree people pleasers, and we believe the customer is always right, and in this instance, the customer isn't. And it's funny too, because someone else was talking to me about this transition we're still making, that salespeople were the walking brochure. Well, guess what? The brochure is everywhere now. So what what
right,
what
right.
what is our new role? And CSO Insights put out a stat from a buyer study they did. It was one stat's very frightening. The other one is like gives us hope. The frightening stat was, sellers are ninth out of 10 places that buyers go for information. So almost dead last. And I think it's because we're still not effectively making that transition from walking,
Yep.
talking brochure. But the good stat is they said we would be happy to talk to them and move them up if they had something to bring us. And I feel like what you're talking about is the something to bring them right at the outset.
Yeah. That's always interesting. I honestly didn't know it was that far down.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's a little bit of a scary factor. I'm trying to think about it in practical light. Like, of course, my car buying experience, it's true. I'm probably going everywhere else first to research the car I want, figure it out. And
Yep.
only on the day am I thinking to myself, hey, I might actually purchase this. Am I walking into the dealership to talk to a salesperson and go through that process? Um, and that is a little messed up, I guess, because who else is going to be able to tell me better about the cars than the people working with them every single day and experiencing the customer use cases and all of the stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is a huge challenge that we need to hit head on. And I think that's where prospecting comes in a little bit too, is instead of saying, hey, are you looking for this solution today? When you're doing your initial cold outreach, it's more, hey, do you want to talk strategy? I'd love to hear about what you're currently doing here, just to get up to speed on what some of your prospective buyers are doing, thinking, and being involved in, and also setting yourself there as a resource.
It's such a fundamental mind shift. And I will say that I personally kick off almost every early sales call with, I am not here to sell you anything today. I don't know. I don't. And in fact, the words I use most often is, I'm not going to prescribe a solution to a problem I haven't diagnosed. Now, they already think they diagnosed it. So we're going to have to challenge that diagnostic a little bit. But that is that immediate lean in from the start. And I think it does go back to, customers do want to talk to us if we have something to bring them. But if we're pitching, if we're the walking, talking brochure, no.
Agreed.
Yeah. So this, I mean, as kind of summarizing some of this stuff, we talked about, we really are the experts. And I think we need to be confident in that. We're the experts in what problems do we solve? How do you make decisions on these kinds of solutions? And I think it comes down to thinking about this sales, and you've actually made this clear to me, thinking about the salesperson's role as diagnostic, right? That's really way before I pitch. Let me understand what the heck am I solving for? And then providing support in decision making. Okay, now that I understand what the problems are, here's a way to make decisions. That feels like a fundamental role and a fundamental shift for salespeople going forward.
I would agree. Especially the diagnostic part of it. I think you can find tons of salespeople historically who will say they're the experts.
Yeah.
I think there's probably quite a bit of ego involved in the sales process, and they all think they're the experts and know everything about everything they're selling. But it's the diagnostic part. It's the understanding part, and really going through the necessary discovery to not just be the expert on what you know, but be the expert on what they know and what they're all about, so you can apply everything you know specifically to them. There's just that extra level of care, credibility, and integrity that comes with, hey, this is what I know, but this is what it means specifically to you, based on everything I've learned from you.
Yeah, it's funny. You just keep saying things that pop ideas into my brain. It's there is a big difference between discovery, traditionally what we'd call discovery, and diagnostic, where you and I have gone. And I feel like diagnostic is much more drilled down and maybe even a little more formalized. There's a lot of discovery where we're asking the buyer to tell us what they already know about themselves, versus I think diagnostic is leading to root cause problems and that kind of thing. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, this actually reminds me of another situation we had recently where I had a prospect come to me. They were spending a lot of money in digital marketing, tons of money in digital marketing, and they thought the digital marketing company was the problem. They were like, listen, we're putting all this money out here and we're just not getting the leads that are converting. Nothing's working the way we want. We're wasting all this money because these users are just not able to find us. And that diagnostics was a deep dive into all their systems they were using. We were looking at the user journey, where they were going from that initial lead case to where they were going to the site. Found out not only did they not have the appropriate analytics, but had nothing to do with their digital marketing company. Digital marketing company was doing great. It had to do with their web platform and how users could convert when they landed. People couldn't find the information they needed. It wasn't aligning properly, and it was just a disaster. and they just had no clue. And our initial questioning wasn't going to get there until we really did the diagnostics and the deep root behind what's happening here. Where are
Yep.
we actually seeing the disconnects?
Yep. Yeah. This has been really helpful. It cements a lot of stuff in my brain that I had ideas about, but brings it down to a level. And you've been super generous with your time and your ideas, and I really appreciate it. And I think this is going to be helpful for those of us who are making that transition from sort of selling stuff to taking that true consultative role. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you having me. This is fun. Hopefully people can get value out of it. That was a nice praise at the end there, but yeah, hopefully this works out for a lot of people.
Thanks, man.
All right, take care.